Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of the Rewriting Crash Course. So in this video series, what I'm doing is helping you diagnose and analyze the problems in your screenplay so that hopefully you can make some progress in fixing them. Now, if you're interested in working with me one-on-one to fix your screenplay, then there is a link below where we can have a conversation about that and see if we are the right fit to work together. If you're interested in that, the link is below. But without further ado, I want to hop into the episode here. This is episode 4, Fixing Structural Problems. Structure is a big point of contention in, screenwriting as a whole, right? Because people want to talk about breaking structure. They want to talk about what, different structural methods, kind of what the purpose of structure is and all of that. So first off, before we get into, the specifics of story momentum and structure and these sorts of things, what I want to start off by saying is that breaking structural principles for the sake of breaking structural principles is the tool of the idiot, and I won't be mentioning this anymore. So if you like to break structure just because, structural rules are meant to be broken, then you don't get the purpose of structure and you're doomed to make boring stories. So, if you're heading down to the comments to talk to me about any of the things I'm about to lay out, are suffocating, then, go watch another video. We don't view story the same, and that's okay, but these videos won't be for you. Okay. So before we talk about larger story structure in the sense of how do you actually structure out a feature, what I want to do is basically break down I've talked a lot about Harmon's story circle, but what I want to do is break down the three core pieces of the movement in a story. So this is essentially want, get, and cost. Okay, so we're not talking about character development. We're not talking about philosophical conflict. We're not talking about dialogue. We're not talking about scenes. We're not even talking about how to structure a screenplay. What we're starting with is the core mechanism of how a story moves forward. Okay, so how does a story move forward, right? With clarity. Okay, a character wants something. They get that thing. It costs them something. Okay, this is the fundamental building block for story momentum. Now, I'm not saying fundamental building block of story as a whole, this sort of thing. It is the fundamental building block of story momentum, right? So you need a character who wants something. Okay, a lot of screenplays miss this, right? What does your character want? Very clearly, because a lot of times writers will write stories where things are constantly happening to their character. Not that things can't happen to your character, but what happens is they go, my character is here, and then a great earthquake comes, and then some guy says, hey, come with me. And so then he goes with this guy, and then another thing happens to them, and another thing happens to them. And the protagonist is essentially along for the ride on this story. That is a bad way to tell the story, right? Your character, your protagonist should be the engine of your story, right? And so if they are in the back seat constantly and other characters are taking the lead, then those are probably the characters that should be your protagonists, or you need to just make your character actually want something. So they want something, they go after that thing, right? This is a huge problem in a lot of stories. Make sure that your character actually wants some sort of thing. It doesn't have to be huge, but they have to want something. Then they get it, right? Whether big or small, they get it. And then, which is a huge thing that people miss, is that it must cost them something. They must pay a price for what they want and what they get, right? This happens for a couple reasons, okay? First off, if your character doesn't pay a price or sacrifice something to get what they want, we know it doesn't seem valuable to them, right? The value of a thing comes from it costing something, right? So obviously, in the real world, we use money for things, right? So it costs you an X dollar amount or whatever to buy some sort of thing. And this is the super basic version of this. In a story, it's going to be a little different. Something will happen. The world will react against your character in some way because of how they have gone towards what they want, and they've gotten it. And then also, the other big thing is because of this cost, now the character is within a new problem and they come back up to the top and they want something. And this is how your story momentum continues, right? So your character wants something, they get it, it comes at a cost, and then we're back to the top because this cost then opens up some sort of new conflict. Now let's look at an example, something very simple, very easy to understand in the opening sequence of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. So Indiana Jones goes into this temple, right? This temple in the middle of the jungle, okay? What does he want? Well, he wants to take this golden idol, right? That's what he's here for. Okay, he searches for it, he goes in, and then he gets it, right? He gets the idol, and then what happens? It comes at a cost. The entire temple starts to crumble. All of the booby traps are, released, and he has to run out as fast as he possibly can, okay? So because of the cost, he now has a new want. What is Indiana Jones's new want? His new want is to escape the temple alive, okay? So he runs out of the temple, he avoids the big stone ball rolling at him. He avoids all the traps. He avoids the poison darts. He gets what he wants. He gets out of the temple. Great. What does it cost him? Now he is surrounded by the tribe and by, I think his name is Belloc, but by the main antagonist of the story, who then takes the idol from him, right? So it costs him something. Now he has, we go back to the top once again, a new want. He wants to escape the tribe and not die. Okay, so what does he do? Well, he runs away and he gets what he wants when he gets to Jacques and the plane. He gets in the plane, they take off, and then the final cost is a much smaller one. To end this sequence, there is a snake in the plane. And we have the opening sequence establishing who Indiana Jones is, what he does, how he handles problems, and the story opens up, okay? So, in every single piece of the story, this is what is happening, right? We're going through this want, getting what they want, and it costing them something, right? And essentially what this is just a more distilled version of the story circle, where you have character, want something, enter an unfamiliar situation, adapt to it, get what they want at 5, cost them something at 6, resolution of conflict at 7, character change at 8, right? So essentially what we've done here is we've cut out, 3, 4, 7, and 8, and looked at character, wants something, gets it, and it costs them something. Now, all of the other ones are still happening, even in the Indiana Jones sequence. But to make it as simple as humanly possible, this is how your story should operate. At its most core level, this is what you're looking for. So if you don't have this in your story, then that is why it doesn't actually have any sort of structural flow. Okay, so this sets us up even at a even smaller level to understand why the story circle works and what you should be looking for when you are trying to diagnose like these simple problems in your story, right? So essentially, what does my character want? What do they get? Like, how do they get that thing? And what does it cost them? And what does how does this cost create the new want, right? Now we are away from our whiteboard and we are looking at this little setup right here. Okay, so once we have that core understanding of how the structure is flowing in your story, we can now look at this here. And this is essentially breaking your character or your story down act by act with, 2 elements in act 2. And these are the big sweeping movements of your story. Now, this is not like a scene to scene outline, but this will give you the big sweeping beats that happen in your story and essentially the big sweeping sequences. So, and again, so this is kind of 1 through 8. As you can see, this is based on the story circle. If you're not familiar with the story circle, then go watch my videos on structure. If you just do Tyler Mowery structure on YouTube, I'm sure they'll come up and you'll get a much more in-depth understanding of what the story circle is. That's not what we're doing here. What we're doing is analyzing problems. So look at the questions I have attached to each of these. So 1 is your character. So you just ask yourself, who is your main character? Then 2, what do they want, right? And the entire story as well as act 1, because they're going to have some sort of larger goal, but at the same time, they're also going to have a want specific to act 1. They're going to be going somewhere specifically in Act 1. They're not just going to the very end of the story. And so then, what unexpected situation forces them into action? If you say, well, I don't know, this is also a problem because there is the push-pull of the world. And this is very important, having that unfamiliar situation, right? Something should either whether it's new information or, a character entering or some sort of inciting incident. There is an inciting incident not only for the opening of your story, but for essentially every movement of conflict in your story. 4 is how do they adapt to the situation and head towards what they want? Pretty simple. For example, with Indiana Jones, he wants the golden idol. And how does he adapt to that? Well, he goes into the temple, encounters the booby traps, which would be 3, and then gets through the booby traps, which would be adapting to the situation, and then gets what he wanted. So how do they get what they want in Act 1 while also pushing towards their story-long want? What does it cost them? And then 7 is the resolution of conflict, right? So if you watch my videos on structure, you'll see that like the 7 is kind of, X'd out or redded out in the act by act version of the story, because 7 is essentially the resolution of conflict. So usually your climax would happen at 7, but the story isn't over, so we continue. And then at 8, how have the actions that your character has taken shown their change, right? So what is their change? Okay. And so then this happens for the next part of your story as well. So you go this Act 2, Part 1, Act 2, Part 2, Act 3, and so on. So you'll see here in Act 3, I also have what is your climax and resolution and how does the entire story fully resolve? That is because finally, there is a resolution of conflict that we didn't see in the previous acts or previous sequences because the story is now ending, okay? So you will then notice that this, at 8, this is kind of how you can really start to build in the change of your character, right? Because they're going after something, it's costing them something, and they're having to continue to choose what they want and how they will go after it. Now we are having an actual character arc here, right? Okay, so do you see just how simple this sort of idea is and how it can actually operate with your entire story as well as the act by act version of your story as well? So that is essentially like, ultimately, that's pretty much all there is to structure, right? So stop constantly like, oh, what about this guy's, what about Blake Snyder's structural beat sheet and having 15 beats for the story? What about this? What about this? It's like, understand the want, the get, the cost, understand the story circle, and that's really it. Like you are probably overcomplicating it so intensely by trying to have some sort of 27-point setup in your story. But then you realize you don't even have this simple idea of want, get, cost. And then the other side is, this is how you actually create a story that's moving forward. Like, I challenge you to really add this to your story and see if it doesn't feel better. Because people I work with in one-on-one, every single time I do this with my one-on-one clients, they like the story more. The story is better, right? And so you can sit there and talk about how structure is suffocating or whatever word you'd like to use, or you can just understand that it is a tool that you are neglecting because you don't actually understand how it operates. So, this is kind of the movement of life, really, right? We go through things to get something, it costs us something, and we change because of that, and we want something else. And that's how things flow. And, there are some articles that I link in the other structure videos that you can take a look at if you want to get Dan Harmon's specific, sort of big theory about all of this. But this is how it flows, right? And if you understand this flow, and if all you do is go back to your story and kind of think about this, then a lot of things will clear up, right? And the biggest thing, again, is when you're rewriting, you're focusing, you're identifying problems, and you're fixing them. You're not adding more complexity to your story. And it's important to think about it that way. Now, if you're interested in working with me one-on-one to fix the problems in your story, there is a link below this video. And then click that link and we can have a conversation about whether or not we would be a good fit to work together. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful, and I'll see you next time.